I'm Nikita Petrov, and I'm an editor here at meaningoflife.tv. And you are Dr. Eric McLuhan, son of Marshall McLuhan. And like your father, you're a communication theorist, you are a literary scholar. Sorry?
Yes.
Okay. You co-authored a few books with your father, and since has been developing the communication theory further. And most recently, you're the author of this book. Let me show it to the camera. The Sensus, Communis, Synesthesia, and the Soul, which I think we're going to be coming back to throughout this conversation. But I want to start with something a little more basic to give context to the ideas that you develop in this book. So can we start with a definition of media? Because you define it way more broadly than is commonly used. Is that correct?
The definition or idea of media has changed rather radically over the last 40 or 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you use the word, it's helpful to indicate what you mean. Most people today, when they say the media, mean one of two things. They either mean the technology, like the television or the radio or the movies or whatever, or the computer, or they use the word to refer to the people who work there.
Right, the institutions.
The media don't like the well, as if they were people.
Mm-hmm.
Like the media had been attacking this group or that group. No, television sets don't attack people, but people who work in television might do so.
Right.
So there are these are the two common ideas of the word medium. But when my father wrote a book called Understanding Media, and that was in the late 1950s and early 1960s, the word had a very different meaning. And it was shortly after that it started to change.
Mm-hmm.
So he defined on the first page of chapter 1, the word medium, he said, means an environment. A medium is an environment of services and disservices that accompany any innovation. It's very close to the French word milieu.
Mm-hmm.
If you know, a milieu is an environment, a circumstance,
right.
A surrounding. Now, that's a medium. And when he's talking about media, the media, or understanding media, he means understanding the environments and the way they change people.
And this environment is created by technology that we also call the medium?
Let me give you an example. The medium of television is not TV sets.
Mm-hmm.
The medium of the airplane or the medium of the car, the medium of the railroad. The medium of the car is the road. And the medium of the car includes the effect on the atmosphere. It includes gas and oil supplies. It includes dealerships and manufacturing. That's the medium. But it also includes all the side effects of the car. For example, the car creates suburbs. It changes cities. Now, it doesn't matter what you use the car for. Whether you're carrying medical supplies or explosives. It doesn't matter what the use is. If you're going to have cars, you have to have highways.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to have cars, you have to have gas and oil. And you have to have repair facilities. And you will change the nature of cities. And you will change the nature of how people relate, let's say, to work, to leisure. All of these are side effects of the car, and they are the medium. of the car.
So then we can refer to any technology and then any environment that this technology produces as the medium. And that would be true of that technology. And
Yeah.
it would be true for, are there any borders to that? Would it be true for, a rock that an ape uses to break a coconut and how that changes the environment?
No, we're speaking here only of human innovations. Because human innovations, like the motor car or like the computer, have reflexive effects on the human, on the user. And these are very seldom examined. The people who study media look exclusively at the content. And they don't look at the environment or the ground, as it's called. They examine only how it is used, and they get almost immediately, they engage in moral discussions about whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. And the moment they get off the track like that, they stop looking at the media. And now they're discussing the content. You see, if you're going to, let's come back to the car. I like the motor car because it's an unexpected example.
Right.
And it's a very clear thing. It doesn't matter at all what you use the car for. In fact, there's a general rule that any new technology will always be used to do all the old jobs.
So with the example of the car?
It does everything that the horse used to do in transportation and so on. But then it does all sorts of new things of itself. For one thing, the new technology turns the old one into an art form.
So the horse becomes kind of a peculiar thing that you can get at a festival, or there are ways that the horse is still used, but it's not the actual tool anymore.
The horse becomes an aesthetic object.
That is interesting.
Now, consider television. It suddenly took over as its content the movie and the newspaper and radio and some of the stage in dramas and soap operas and so on. And the moment it took over the movies suddenly blossomed into a new kind of life. Instead of being something that was regarded as just low class, trash, low culture, suddenly movies became high culture.
And why is that?
And, well, that's because they now had a frame around them, the frame of television. And the new sensibility. See, television is a very different way of seeing from film. So when you look at film through this new way of seeing, film at that moment began to develop big screens, huge screens. At that moment also, film began to turn into color. Now, color movies were possible.
Oh, into color.
Which was a completely new experience. The Hollywood star system was taken apart within a decade. Because on television, people don't act, they behave. You don't have TV actors. The people who, let's say, run the talk shows, the news announcers, they're not acting. They're just being themselves.
They sort of are acting, and The way a news host talks on the TV show is not the way a normal person talks in a normal environment.
No, but he's not trying to be this or that
Right.
or another character. He's being himself. Himself in front of a public, but still basically himself. And it's the same with everybody else who goes on TV. And movies' acting styles changed. The movie theaters had, they used to come in chains. The big studios like Paramount and so on had chains of theaters all across the country. That fell apart right away.
With the invention of television?
Yeah. Look at what happened with the computer. At first, the computer took over two things as its content. One was it took over the accounting, and the other, it took over the filing cabinet. That was at first. But then it got into the office, the business office, and it changed business totally.
So the
It
computer
got rid of
now,
secretaries.
the computer now seems to take on, it looks like the jobs of all of the previous media. The computer has TV in it, and radio in it, and print in it, and the calculator. And so do you feel about this new version of the electric media, the computer and the internet? Is it some sort of a final stage, or we're getting close to a final stage where everything is going to be in one medium?
I don't think so. There's always something bigger on the way. There's now a thing called the Internet of Things.
That's
Have you heard of that?
Yes. So that would be the wearable objects that there's even a. Sorry, go ahead. I was about to say that there are so many. I forget the term now, but there is a movement where people use the wearable objects to record everything about their body. They basically add in kind of a sensory apparatus onto them to track their heartbeat, to track the level of different chemicals in their blood or something like that, and then extrapolate from that what they should be doing with their life to improve their feeling or something.
And those devices are connected to other devices. So they're already part of the Internet of Things. There's also one now that measures your brain activity, your brain waves, and broadcasts that. They say also that if you have a pacemaker, that will be connected. So by the time you're totally wired, what happens to you, to your autonomy? You're a sort of robot.
A cyborg, at the very least, right? Have you heard? This is kind of unrelated. I'm getting completely off track of what I was thinking we're going to talk about. But have you heard about these people who called body hackers? And I think a different term is grinders. That is, people who are, as of now, before the big companies and the corporations start offering these cybernetic options, there are people who are sitting in their garages working on that already. I've heard a story about a guy who implanted tiny little magnets into his fingertips. And what that produced is, at first, he would just feel little vibrations in his hands every time he's next to a metal object or electromagnetic field. But then after a little bit, in a couple of weeks, at least he claims, his brain got used to this new kind of sensory input, and he basically added another sense to the 5 that we usually have. So he, like everybody, he can see things, he can hear things, but he can also just feel electromagnetic fields.
Apparently, we can do that anyway. The number of senses, by coincidence, I happen to have a book here at my fingertips to read this. It's called Deciphering the Senses.
Mm-hmm.
And it reports on not just the basic 5, but it says we have about 15 or 18 senses in all. There's sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell, those 5. And then 3 more that are commonly examined: proprioception, synesthesia, and the visceral sense. Proprioception is the sense whereby you know where all the parts of your body are. You know where your feet are right now. You know where your fingers are. And so on. Kinesthesia is your sense of motion, of movement. And these 2 apparently are very important because they include all of the other senses. And the visceral sense is what we call the gut sense. You can know something in your guts. You just know something is this way or that way.
Would that be similar to intuition?
In some ways, yes. But everybody has it.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't a just thing very often, but it's there. I don't think it's measurable. We also have a sense, an electrical sense. You know, when sometimes your hair stands on end, right? That's electricity.
So would it be correct to say that? Would it be correct to say that? You know, we have this broad spectrum of different senses, but we often don't notice some of them, or we are not cognizant of some of them. Would it be correct to say that, at least in part, or maybe in a big part, that is because the effect of different media that we are placed in, the environments we're placed in, that are created by technology that we have?
It helps if you regard technologies as extensions of your senses. The subtitle of Understanding Media is The Extensions of Man.
Yes.
The idea is that all of our technologies extend different parts of our bodies or our senses or our thinking. They take something that is inside us and put it outside. And that has reflexive effects on us. But each of them also becomes a modification of our senses. The book we were going to talk about talks about the Sensus Communis, which is a kind of committee room of all the senses. And when one of them becomes exaggerated or distorted or extended or suppressed, the others know immediately and they compensate. They tend to take very close notice of what each one of them is doing, and to accommodate the new balance. I gave an example of a man who was blind.
Yes.
Who became blind. And he didn't know he was blind, or he wasn't told that this was a terrible thing. He was a very young boy. And his other senses got together and restored sight.
So basically the information that the information that, so he lost the channel of perceiving information through his eyes, but then all of the other senses, organs of senses that he had, the information that presented through, the information that his body got through other senses was then presented to him visually instead of the usual sight. Would that be correct to say?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Would. By the way, he wrote a wonderful account of that experience, and I really recommend that you get hold of it. I'm pretty sure it's in German. He wrote it in French. So if you read French, you can get that. It's called Et la lumière fut.
I do not read French, but the translation that you have, you quote from that book in yours, and that was a very interesting, not only very interesting read, but he uses language very, very well. It's very engaging account.
Well, look it up on the internet.
Right.
See what translations are of.
So you're giving that example as a case for all of the senses that we have, the separate senses that we have, they meet somewhere, and that is what you call sensus communis.
Yeah, the common sense.
The common sense, right? There is since we finally started talking about the book, there is a story that you tell there that is very striking and presents how media can change us in a very drastic way that I was, not anticipating. So you talk about something you call the first all-out media war waged by Plato against the poets, and it has to do with the concept of mimesis and the invention of the alphabet. Can you talk about that for a little bit? So first off, what is mimesis? And am I pronouncing that word correctly?
Mimesis or mimesis. Aristotle opened the Poetics with this statement. Mimesis is the process whereby all men learn.
Mm-hmm.
That's the opening sentence of the Poetics. And in his time, that is, about the 4th century BC, mimesis had been the traditional way that the poets passed on the knowledge of the culture. And the point of poetry wasn't so much to entertain as to educate in those days. We're getting some of that back now with rap music, where the rappers in the neighborhoods are, in a way, an oral newspaper. Whenever something happens, a new rap comes out that talks about it and reports and discusses it. This is quite aside from whatever is recorded, because by the time it's recorded, it's all ancient history.
Right.
Or it's a different mode of rap for entertainment. But mimesis was the medium of transmission. However, the oral poetry was similar to rap because very much of it was extemporized, and it wasn't so much spoken as it was sung, and usually to the sound of a lyre. And the lyre is set up very much like rap music, a kind of drum or repetitive rhythm and repetitive sequence of sounds. And the poet would speak using that. So we're very close to the conditions in poetry right now that were in place 2,500 years ago. Oh, it wasn't just then. In the 1930s, 40s, a couple of researchers went into Yugoslavia, and they found old techniques still being practiced and they reported on it. It was Albert Lord wrote a book called The Singer of Tales to discuss this phenomenon. He and Norman Perry did a lot of studies in Yugoslavia. I've heard of it being done in Greece about 100 years ago, in the hill country. The same thing was going on. A friend of mine told me that his grandfather, as a young boy, this would be much earlier in the 19th century, as a young boy he'd heard in a tavern a wandering poet come in and recite the Odyssey. It took 2 days, and he recited the Odyssey. 2 days and a lot of drinks.
And what was that in Greece?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
That is
in
really
an area. No, the grandfather was not literate, and the people around him at the time were not literate people. It wasn't that they didn't have an education; they just didn't need literacy. They didn't have much use for it in order to live, to do their jobs, to work, to have a culture and society. We find that difficult to imagine, but there you are. Anyway, to get back, Aristotle and Mimesis.
Yeah.
Now, the poets conveyed a thing called the tribal encyclopedia. Encyclopedia is a Greek word, ekluklios, meaning the circle of knowledge, the wheel of knowledge, comes down and around. So the epic poems, like the Iliad and the Odyssey, are themselves encyclopedias. And in it, for example, in the Odyssey, Odysseus has to do a great number of things. He has to know how to behave himself at court. He has to know the proper ways of addressing people at different stations. He has to know how to build ships, how to invent devices. And the real purpose of a story like that is to use the storyline as almost like the line you hang out the washing on when you clean your clothes. You hang well, they use the storyline to hang all of this knowledge. There's knowledge of navigation, knowledge of carpentry, knowledge of social and political things, all kinds of knowledge. So the real point of a big poem like that is to be an encyclopedia and to convey this knowledge and preserve it and pass it on from one generation to another.
And the story is required there for this to be, for people to be able to memorize that and to actually internalize that knowledge.
And that's like, how do you memorize it? Well, mimesis was the technique. By mimesis, it was almost hypnotic. The poet would set up this droning sound. He wouldn't sing a melody the way the rappers don't sing melodies. They use rhythms, and they use words and cliches and expressions in a particular way that makes it very easy to remember. We have people in our culture who are experts at doing exactly this, and who know thousands of lines by memory of their creation. The advertisers. The advertisers, they know exactly how to help you or make you remember things. Their kinds of things. Now, you may say, but that's trivial. That's still, but it works.
It does work.
And therefore, in their own way, they are practicing this old technique. By mimesis, if you're listening to the exploits of Odysseus, let's say, or of Achilles, or of any of the characters in these poems, you don't just listen to it. You enter into the action. The way, let's say, the kids entered into the characters on video games. They become so immersed in the game and in the character and in the action that in many ways they become that character. There's no more any difference between them and what they're doing on the screen. And it's exactly like that with mimesis in the oral poems.
So when the poet is speaking, is speaking as, let's say, Achilles, the audience feels as if they are Achilles themselves.
Yes. And they begin to think as Achilles does, and to feel as Achilles does, and to respond to people and situations as Achilles does. And their participation is so complete that they effectively have become the character and had the experience and pronounced the speeches, and it is absolutely unforgettable. My friend who had his grandfather tell him about hearing the Odyssey recited said that 50 years later he could recite long passages of what he'd heard just once.
So are you saying in that story with your friend, performer used the same technique?
Yes.
Huh.
Yes, it was still being used. And it's probably still being used today.
That would be very interesting. How would we go about finding those people? That would be a proper topic for research.
I think if you did some research, you would find contemporary examples. You might start with that book, The Singer of Tales, and get an idea.
All right, that is on my to-do list now. So back to Plato and Aristotle. They were not happy with this practice of mimesis, were they?
Well, the trouble was there was a new game in town, and that was the game of logical reasoning and philosophy. The Socratic and post-Socratic philosophers all wanted people to use a thing called detachment. And mimesis is the enemy of detachment. Mimesis is absolute, complete involvement. But if you're going to be logical, and if you're going to practice this new technique of abstract reasoning, you have to have detachment. So these two things were completely at war with each other. Plato declared war on the poets in the Republic, his book, The Republic. And Aristotle took him up on it and went further. For detachment, you had to be able to reason and think in the mind without speech. And that was impossible before Plato's time. The alphabet was the medium. The alphabet got into the situation and changed things. Once you could write down words, you had now 3 ways to experience language, whereas before there was only one. And that one way was speech. The spoken word was everything. And mimesis was the medium for the spoken word. But with writing, suddenly you had words here on a piece of paper. So there was the word in speech, there was the word in writing, although that was always read aloud. But then there was the third, the word in the mind, before speech. These three forms of the word gave rise to three sciences. The science of speech, suddenly the spoken word became an art form. That art form is called rhetoric.
It wouldn't be correct to say that this is an example of what you spoke about earlier, a new technology making the previous one an art form, or would it?
Yes, it would. That's exactly right.
Okay.
Now, that doesn't mean to say that mimesis went away. It didn't. It was still around. It was all over the place. One of the effects of obsolescence is that the thing that is obsolete doesn't go away. It's the reverse. There's more of it than ever. So mimesis used to be just the province of the poets. Suddenly it was everywhere. It's part of its becoming an art. Now, second, there is grammar, rhetoric, grammar, dialectic. Grammar, the word grammar is from the Greek word gramma for letters. It meant the written word, the word in writing. And that was a new art form, because now you could look at words as well as hear them. Totally new experience. And then thirdly, there was this dialectic. Dialectic was the science of thinking properly. The word in the mind, divorced from speech. And Plato and Aristotle were champions of dialectic. And you couldn't have the word in the mind without speech unless you get rid of mimesis. So they had to find ways around all of those techniques.
Why do you have to get rid of mimesis? Why do you have to get rid of mimesis?
What? Because it would not allow you to think. You didn't do your own thinking. You were participating in something. You couldn't pull back from participation and be objective.
Right, but couldn't you do that as you visit a poet's performance, and then after that is done, engage in a different type of thinking?
You mean be a spectator?
Well, so mimesis, can mimesis be limited to a performance of a poet, but then once that is over, you can think on your own? Why do you have to completely get rid of mimesis? Or am I misunderstanding the original statement?
Well, mimesis does not allow for spectators or detachment. And it's detachment is a faculty, I guess, of the mind. And it is an all or nothing kind of situation. You are either capable of detachment or not.
Okay.
If you're wrapped up in mimesis, and this is how you live and how you think, then detachment is it's a terrible thing. It's a terrifying thing. If you have detachment, then you separate yourself from the life of the community. You're now outside. You're an outsider. But detachment, as we all know, confers a lot of other powers of observation and of imagination. But somebody who is capable of detachment has broken the bond of mimesis, and it's It's never going to be the same. You can't get it all the way back ever again. It really is either or. One
Okay.
or the other.
Okay.
But so Aristotle and Plato and all of those philosophers of that era and following were trying to find ways to manage this new skill of detachment.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, they're surrounded by the fragments and the shreds of the mimetic cultures all over.
Mm-hmm.
So Aristotle came up with the syllogism, and it worked pretty well. One of the things with mimesis was that you began thinking and imagining in imagery, in images. And if you're going to think in words, you have to stop that.
And the syllogism
the syllogism
made that happen.
Does not. Yes, it did. I invite you to try the syllogizing in images. Try it.
I did. You proposed that in the book as well. I did, and I failed. So let's illustrate that, taking a famous syllogism of all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, hence Socrates is mortal. That is very difficult to present in image form. That would be like a graphic novel.
Yeah, you couldn't even do that in a graphic novel. You have to use words somewhere.
Right.
You can't draw a picture of all.
Right.
You can't draw a picture of the ideal mortal. And you can't take, if you could, you can't take two pictures and put them together to mean all men are mortal. It cannot be done. I know a number of people who are artists and cartoonists and graphic novelists, and I've asked them to try it. They just laugh. So go away, don't be silly.
So the syllogism is a new way of thinking, at that time, was a new way of thinking that basically prohibited people from thinking in images, you're saying?
Yes, it was a revolution.
As I was reading that,
absolute, complete revolution. Nothing like it.
As I was reading that, I thought of a conversation I had recently with a couple of friends. And in the course of that conversation, we kind of stumbled on the difference in the way the three of us think. And also there is attached to that the way your consciousness works as you're falling asleep. So let me explain what I mean. We were talking, the three of us, and the two of us, these friends of mine, they're a married couple, and they were talking about how they're trying to work on communication within their family, they try to understand each other better and communicate more clearly. And it turned out that one of the problems with that is the guy, when he thinks about something, a thought is presented to him as literally black letters on white background. And the girl usually thinks in images. She sees, a guitar or something. And so he gets very annoyed when he says something. She thinks about what he says, comes back with a response, and in there quotes what he says and misquotes him. He gets very annoyed because he remembers exactly where each letter stood and the order of the words and what he said. But to her, she has to take his original thought, translate it into her mode of thinking, then work on that, come up with a conclusion, translate that back into words, and then of course you're going to have misquotes. Of course there's going to be a degree of error. You just translated a thing back and forth. And then I realized, as they were saying that, I realized that to me, I hear thoughts more than I see, or they're not presented to me as sentences as in a written book, or images as in a cartoon. I speak to myself, or I hear somebody speaking inside my head. So was that, as I'm trying to figure out, you're talking about kind of similar things, but on a larger scale. You're saying the society of ancient Greece was thinking in images up until Aristotle came up with syllogism and changed the game. Does it mean that the society in general thought in images, but people thought, or maybe we can speak about our society now. So in this example, I had 3 people in the room, and each had their own version, their own mode of thinking. But is there a general sense how our society is thinking, sort of collectively, or the majority of people think in images or words? Or
this is a very rich territory. First off, in the example you gave, the wife thought in images, and the husband saw words on a blackboard. But that's an image.
That's true.
And if you're syllogizing, you don't even get that. People who don't think in images don't have anything, no picture at all. The second point, think about let's say, the way a Chinese thinks and a German or a Russian literate. Chinese writing is writing with images. Mm-hmm. The Chinese character is a cartoon, it's a picture, it's a comic book, a graphic novel. It's not letters, it's not an alphabet, it's not words. They don't write words. Their writing system is very subtle, but it is entirely images, pictures. There's no correlation between the Chinese character and sounds, the way there's a correlation between an alphabetic character and a sound. Mm-hmm. Now, for that reason, the Chinese character can be used actually to write any language. In China, there are hundreds of languages and dialects of Chinese. But every single one of them can communicate exactly with every other one using precisely the same characters. Because they're not sounds, they're not words, they're pictures.
So it's like you have 2 languages at the same time. You have the language you use when you speak, or when you write in phonetic language representation. But those are
They don't use phonetic.
Okay.
They use picture. It's not phonetic. It's
right,
pictures,
I understand.
Images.
They do have, though, like a simplified phonetic alphabet, right? I know that on the smartphones they need to figure out how to type that.
The Japanese do.
Oh, okay.
That's exactly what the Japanese do. They use a number of Chinese characters, but the Japanese also have syllabaries, a couple of them. And in fact, a lot of Japanese books are very amusing. They have Chinese characters, they have their own syllabary, and they also use the alphabet, all on the same page. They're very flexible people. But the Chinese now have, in their writing system, just images, so that's one side. And then we use letters. So here's your husband and wife.
Right.
But most people now in the West think in images. They don't think in words or in letters of the alphabet anymore. Most people do. This change has been going on now for about 50 years.
And this is there some sort of research? Is that like people were polled, or how do we know how people think?
Oh, well, you can ask them. I used to do this in the 1970s, 80s, 90s when I was teaching in school. I'd ask my classes, do you think in words or in images?
Mm-hmm.
If I say to you, elephant, do you bring up in your mind an image of an elephant?
I just did.
Or do you have any image? Yeah, well, or the elephant is going to eat that tree. So you'll have a little panorama going on in your mind. But people who think in words don't get any images. They just think of words. If you read a poem, I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree, in fact, and so on. If you think of a poem or you're reading a poem, do you have a cascade of pictures and images in your mind and feelings and sensations and smells? Or do you simply have the words and the rhythms and the sounds? And when I began asking this question in the later 1960s, most people would say, well, I don't see pictures necessarily, but I do have the rest, the words and sounds. And when I stopped in the 1980s, almost everybody would say, yeah, I see pictures like that. It had taken that long. No, I'm not speaking of theory, just what people's experiences were.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, it's become more and more and more that we are deep into image
And
thinking.
do you tie this thinking in images with the involvement in the experience? The mimesis?
You know about the work that has been done on the left and the right side of the brain?
Somewhat.
The left hand?
Yeah.
Because a lot of the answers
Mm-hmm.
lie right there.
Mm-hmm.
The left side is the one that deals with language and with abstraction and detachment. The right side of the brain is the complementary side, and it is emotions and images and feelings and music. In the right side, things happen simultaneously. In the left side, things happen one at a time, sequentially.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and here's your husband and wife.
That's right.
Yeah. The mimesis is totally right brain, right side of the brain. Completely. Detachment in the alphabet is completely left side.
So with that...
It's not either or. Get this. You don't have to choose sides. Because in everybody, the two sides of the brain are linked by a couple of 100 million connections,
Mm-hmm.
Left to the right, called the corpus callosum. And so they are in constant and profoundly deep conversation with each other. And yet, our cultures tend to have a bias in one direction or the other. And the big deciding factor for us for 2,500 years has been the alphabet, which was so powerful that it gave us the ability to prefer one of those modes of experience to the other. The alphabet is no longer in charge. We are now in a position where the alphabet is countercultural. Literacy is not the formation or the basis of culture in the West anymore. It's the counterculture. And something else is the basis of culture. And we are over time.
All right. Well, this was extremely interesting to me, and I have 2 more pages of notes and questions for you. Okay, well, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, and goodbye.
Good luck.
Bye-bye. Auf Wiedersehen.